Good morning everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on China anti-dumping duties, know before you owe. My name is Jason Gispan. I am the Director of Customs Compliance here at Flexport, and I have with me Brenda Custer-Escalita, our VP of Customs Compliance. My background has been mainly in the import side, about 3 decades now, a little more than 3 decades, 2 decades as a customs broker, but definitely focused on the import and very familiar with this type of subject and with companies that have dealt with it. So I'm here to help share information on that. I also want to mention too, our mission here at Flexport is really to keep the trade community educated. So we really enjoy doing this kind of thing and want to continue, and we will do additional webinars on a variety of topics as we move ahead here in future months. But if you have a topic that you love and you want to hear more about or are interested in or just want to learn more about, please definitely let us know. We love that feedback, and we'd like to obviously do some things that are going to add some value there for you. So Brenda, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining. My name is Brenda Custer-Escalita. I am the Vice President of Customs Compliance here at Flexport. Just like Jason, I have decades of experience in customs brokerage and customs compliance. I'm a licensed broker from long ago. We love educating our clients and educating the public, so again, we're happy to be here and share this information with you. Before we proceed, I do need to drop in a little bit of a legal disclaimer. What we're going to share with you is not considered legal advice. If you have any doubt and need any really detailed information, we do suggest you contact a trade attorney. This is just kind of a high-level overview introduction and a call out for what we believe importers need to know before they import product. Our agenda will be about 20 minutes of conversation and then ample time at the end for Q&A. If you do have questions, you'll want to use the little icon app up there on the right side of your screen. If you scroll down, there should be a gray bar where you can type in questions. We will review those when we conclude our slide presentation. And you can type in your question at any time. And again, we'll leave ample time at the end for the Q&A.
Great. Yeah, and also just to add, really our objective today will be to have you learn more about what anti-dumping and countervailing duties are, giving you, somewhat of a high level view to understand what they are, and then what the hidden risks are, because it's really about the hidden risks. We hear all about the new tariffs that are coming out under Section 301, excuse me, and that's very publicized, but anti-dumping and countervailing are not. So there's a lot of things that people don't really know about, and we wanted to share that information so that you will know before you owe, as we say. But we'll also tell you a little bit more about how to figure out whether or not your products are covered. We've had a few clients, find themselves in this situation where their freight was here, and only to find out after we helped them with the classification that the product was subject to dumping. And then, of course, they were in a predicament as to determine a lot of things. So it's real important that you know all of this before you go. So to move into the hidden monetary risks, we wanted to give you an example. So if you think of the widgets example, 10,000 pieces valued, let's say $100,000. Those are expensive widgets, but that's what we're going to do for numbers. So the regular duty on that HTS for widgets, let's say, is 2%. So you would have $2,000 in duty. And then the China tariffs, unfortunately, this product is falling under that as well. So there's 25% more. That's $25,000 additional. And then it turns out this product is under the preliminary anti-dumping case. And currently the preliminary rate is at 67%, which would mean an additional $67,000 deposit. And that it's really a deposit. They want to collect what is the preliminary rate at the time you import the product. So you'd have to put up another $67,000, totaling $94,000 in duty. And then 3 years later, the final rate is issued, and that rate is issued at 88%. Well, that's, above what you paid. So yes, you will owe an additional $11,000, and that is 3 years after you've already sold the product, right? Total duty there, 105,000 plus interest on the 11,000 that was additional. So as you can see, dumping products are especially dangerous for importers. There's a lot of volatility there because you just don't know what's coming. The goods under the preliminary duty rates are what you pay, but the final rates are what is due, and that could happen years later. And of course, that is a big risk, not only for the importer, but for other stakeholders.
Right. We again, are concerned for importers. It's really disheartening to us when one of our clients is unknowing that their product has anti-dumping and it's already in the US. So again, our key here throughout this presentation is before you buy is when you want to know if your goods have anti-dumping duties or not. So what are these anti-dumping or countervailing duties? Essentially, there are laws on the books that allow the government to level the playing field by the assessment of anti-dumping or countervailing duties. Goods are being imported at less than fair market value, and a U.S. industry is being harmed. Those are the two key elements. Anti-dumping duties typically means goods are being sold at a price lower than it costs to make the merchandise, a price that is lower than what is charged in the home market. Countervailing duties, again, same thing. They're being imported at a price lower than what it costs to make it, but it is because that manufacturer was offered subsidies by the foreign government. And those subsidies can be things like loan forgiveness, real estate free of charge, kind of a wide variety of ways governments can help industries in their home market really develop a world market for their product by having lower cost goods. Anti-dumping and countervailing duties are assessed really to bridge that gap from what is fair market value. And that's why you'll see anti-dumping duties. I think the lowest I've ever seen is like 2.67%.
Yeah.
And the highest for a petition that's been filed by the American manufacturers of mattresses, and that is at 1,700+%. So to the first slide we showed with the numbers, you can imagine if you're not aware and attempting to import mattresses, how different your estimates for what you're going to sell your goods for if you get hit with anti-dumping duties. So how does this whole process work? It starts with a U.S. domestic industry that feels they are being harmed by low-priced imports of their product. They file a petition with the Department of Commerce and the International Trade Commission. And they say those two government agencies do an initial investigation and they determine if there are dumping or subsidies occurring on that product, and if a U.S. industry is being harmed. Both those things have to be found to be true for an anti-dumping or countervailing duty order to move forward. If they believe that both of those are true, the government will issue what is called a preliminary order setting initial estimated anti-dumping or countervailing duties, and that's where your entry process is affected. There's a note at the bottom of the screen that it is true and it is possible that a product may have both anti-dumping duties and countervailing duties, and that's a real unfortunate situation to not be aware of, but it does occasionally happen. There's a difference. I think this is key to our quick presentation here. What is the difference? Why do I care so much if my product has anti-dumping or countervailing duties? There are preliminary orders, and that's when the initial duty rates are set. But note that these rates can change when the case becomes final. When preliminary orders are issued, all future entries need to be filed with the payment for those anti-dumping or countervailing duties. But note that those are just preliminary rates. They're not final yet, and they're subject to change when the full investigation is concluded.
Yeah, that's why they call them deposits, because you're depositing on dumping, but it's not final.
Correct.
Yeah.
Customs will withhold liquidation of your entries if they are under the preliminary stage of the order. And that means they don't put their stamp of approval on accepting your entry when they withhold liquidation. Liquidation means Customs has finalized the duty computation. Final anti-dumping or countervailing orders typically take years to be issued, and it's because extensive investigation needs to be done by the government. The entries are liquidated once the final order is issued at those final rates. And what happens is if there's a difference from what you deposited to what the final amount is, Customs will issue a bill to the importer of record, or if you luck out and it's lower, you will get a refund. And in both scenarios, there will be interest included as well. The US system is a retroactive system, and the rates are not determined until long after the date of importation.
Again, why it's so serious and volatile as an issue. So we want to move into talk about the scope of the cases and HTS flags, the harmonized tariffs system flags. So the scopes are basically, the scope details what exactly is included in the order. I've got to continue to hit return as I move along here. And that basically will give all the detail about what is covered, possibly what's excluded, and if there's any scope rulings that have been issued that either are, well, most likely excluding it. But you can find all that in the scope details, and those are all listed on the internet, and we'll give you a link to where that is at the end of this presentation here. But yeah, then as far as the harmonized tariff numbers, they are flagged for anti-dumping or countervailing duty if the DOC or the Department of Commerce associates the scope to that HTS number. So basically they know, certain products that fall under a certain code will have dumping or may have dumping, so those flags are there. But not all HTS numbers are flagged. And here's a little example of what that means. So you have solar cells, right? Those are under dumping, and solar cells are classified under a specific tariff number, which has the flag. So if you bring in solar cells, then classify them as solar cells, the flag is there and it will notify the filer. But solar powered battery chargers or any type of solar powered product which has solar cells in it at the time of import, they don't have a flag. That might be classified if it's a lighting or a battery charger. Those are classified separately under what it is, a battery charger or a lighting equipment. And so the solar part of it isn't, part of it, and that dumping case isn't associated to that classification. So you have to know that they're solar powered and that they're solar cells, and guess what? They're still subject to dumping. Now you can, in some cases segregate out and pay the dumping just on the cost of the solar cell itself. But those are different situations that have to be looked at. But the bottom line is, just because it's classified under something that doesn't have a flag, it still might be subject to dumping. And this is where, a lot of importers find out when they import it that well, it has solar and it's dumping. So it's real important you know that.
So why are we concerned for our clients? Why are we concerned for importers at large? Because anti-dumping brings with it additional exposure, monetary exposure. Customs has anti-dumping and countervailing duties on a priority trade issue list. And what that means is the Customs Service gets additional manpower and additional money to investigate anti-dumping and countervailing duty evasion cases. They focus on collecting additional duties, and that's a particular call out from the Government Accounting Office years ago, did an audit of the Customs Service and said, you're getting a failing mark for collecting all the anti-dumping and countervailing duties that are owed to the US government. So with that remark from the General Accounting Office, penalty cases have continued. In fact, they have increased. An additional hit for an importer is also concerning their continuous or annual customs bond. It's a requirement that every importer have a customs bond. It is based typically on 10% of the estimated duties you would pay in a year. When you start having these very high anti-dumping duty rates, you will saturate that continuous bond. And at that point, in order to get an increase to the bond, you work with your surety company, and they will take a look at your financials before they will agree to write that bond. In many cases, depending on the dollar amounts you're talking about, the surety company will also ask for a letter of credit to protect that surety company, again, through this extended liquidation cycle to make sure they have themselves covered.
Yeah, and just to add to, most of the time we see 100% collateral on the bond, so.
Correct. Another document that is part of the anti-dumping process is called a non-reimbursement statement. It's a certificate that Customs collects prior to liquidation. It needs to be on file with Customs. And it's a statement that the importer signs to tell Customs we were not reimbursed for these anti-dumping duties by the manufacturer. And the reason they ask for that, if you were reimbursed by the manufacturer, you're really circumventing the whole process of the government collecting these anti-dumping duties. If you do not have that on file with Customs at time of liquidation, they are authorized to liquidate at double the anti-dumping duties. So again, we're talking excessive dollar amounts. The other problematic issue for importers is you cannot forecast where the final rates will end up. You have sold the items long before the final rates come out. And so it's not until long after you have imported that you know what you owe.
So know before you owe, as we said. This is an example of an evasion case that happened. It's a large furniture importer you can see there, but they were bringing in furniture and it was being classified as if it was other than bedroom furniture, when in fact it was wooden bed and furniture, which is under anti-dumping. So it's easy, to accidentally do that too, for an importer to be classifying something when they think they're correct and it turns out they're wrong and they end up with a situation like this. But as you can see, it wasn't a small amount that they had to deal with there. So very important. And if you're a furniture importer online, definitely read this case. Also want to give you some examples of what we know today commodities are that are currently coming in with dumping and countervailing duties. Some of these our clients are importing pencils. We have a client that's bringing in a kit, and in that kit is all kinds of things that a kid would take to school, and it includes pencils. But the pencils are anti-dumping. Everything else in the kit isn't, but they still have to pay the dumping on the pencils. But there's a lot of well-known things that are imported: folding gift boxes, magnets, wood flooring. These are very popular things. Wood and bedroom furniture. So as you can see, there's a lot of things out there, and there's more coming as U.S. industry, fights against this type of issue. So that's something else you'll see online as well. So we wanted to share some actions to take, before you're buying. Obviously, don't be caught off guard. It's really important that you do all the research on the commodities that you're going to buy before you buy them, because you might end up not buying them or sourcing them in another location because the country you're looking at is under a dumping case. But there's a list of current preliminary and final orders. On this presentation you'll get after this, after we're done, there's a link here, and that gives you a spreadsheet. It's an Excel sheet that will download that Customs gives that basically tells all the current and final orders that are out there. And then there's a list of the case scopes, which is important, and that can be seen here. And to the right, you'll see actually a picture of the screen. If you click on the search function there for search text at the top and the right, all you do is key in a keyword and it will find it. And then you'll just, of course, have to pick which country, and then it'll take you and you can read what the scope is, and it gives you all the details. So basically, you know, that's really it. Again, we have those links there.
Right. One little tip on the search. Try different versions of naming conventions that you would have for the item you're considering. For example, porcelain on steel cookware has anti-dumping on it. If you search cookware, you might not find it. If you search cooking, you might find it. So different versions of what your product is called may help you target if there's anti-dumping or not. It's not as straightforward as it seems. The one that's really hard is solar cells. They actually are called dielectric crystalline, I don't even think they say cells.
Yeah.
So try a couple of different iterations of the verbiage that you would call your product when you search.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to add to that too, another thing too, if you're not finding anything, you could, if you look at that on the screen right now, you could pick it by country too and search that way if you wanted to.
Correct. So key to this, our presentation is please don't rely on your supplier's advice. They're really not the experts for importing into the US. They want to sell you the product, so be careful what they tell you. Do your investigation yourself and check in with your customs broker. Customs brokers deal with this really weekly, daily, and should be well versed into looking at these web pages and getting the information for you ahead of buying. Once you buy it, you're kind of stuck. So we really just want to stress to get the information before you buy. And lastly, a very, very helpful document that goes into much further detail than what we have through this brief webinar is the anti-dumping countervailing duty frequently asked questions that's put together by US Customs. It really details further the process. You can find a lot of information online at the DOC or the International Trade Commission. But again, our purpose of putting this webinar together was really to get you familiar with the process and to know the risks before you buy the product. The worst thing that happens to importers and to our clients is finding out after the goods are here, when your customs broker goes to do the entry, that the items are subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duties. And I think now we're going to open it to questions.
Yeah. Looks like we had some questions, but we're having some audio, I guess, problems in the beginning. So let's see if there's any other questions that have come through. If you have a question, feel free to type it in now. Looks like we have one here. Oh yeah. What if I don't want to pay the anti-dumping duty, but my cargo has already arrived? Yeah, what are my options? Unfortunately, there's not too many options other than paying the deposit. You could re-export the goods or really abandon them. And I hate to say that, but those are really the only two options if you're not willing to pay the dumping. Okay, let's see. Any other questions coming up? Here's one. So this is asking if all subsidies are countervailing. Well, to be a countervailable, I guess you could say, it must involve a government financial contribution that confers to a benefit that's specific to the certain enterprise or industry or region. And that's contingent upon export or the use of domestic goods over the imported goods in production. So basically, it has to be a government financial contribution to be countervailable. Hope that answers that question. Okay, we'll give another minute here. Somebody's typing. Okay, any other questions? Oh, okay. When does suspension of liquidation begin? Well, you want to answer that one?
Sure. Suspension of liquidation begins the moment the order is issued. So if it's a preliminary order, Customs will begin collecting immediately anti-dumping duties, and at that moment, they will also suspend liquidation of filed entries from that date forward. There is something also called a critical circumstance where prior to the preliminary order being issued, when the petition is filed, during that initial investigation period, if the government feels that there has been a surge of imports, meaning people are importing like crazy in higher volumes than they ever have before, they will throw in something called critical circumstance, and they can collect anti-dumping duty at that time 90 days prior from the date they throw on critical circumstances. So that even goes in arrears. You don't even know the order has been issued and they're going to go back 90 days. That's a little rare, but in cases like this recent mattress case where the duty rates can be 1,000+%, to know that you've imported and then be told that you must pay these duties is when you need a trade attorney, quite honestly.
Great. Okay. Don't see any other questions popping up yet, so we'll give another minute here. See if anybody else has any questions. It's great. We got through this pretty quick. We really did work on this presentation in a way to answer questions that we thought were going to be out there. So hopefully that's why people are not having questions any farther.
Here's one that someone asked, how do I know if my products fall within the scope? Who can help me determine that? The official answer is you have to read the scope itself and the scope rulings. But if you feel your product needs to be excluded, there is an official way to ask the Department of Commerce for a ruling on a scope decision. There is a process for that. It's, again, a legal process and takes some months to get an answer to it. Advisory services, we find as a customs broker, these customs centers of excellence and expertise are often very knowledgeable about current anti-dumping duty orders and what commodities fall within that, and they will help a customs broker who has done some due diligence research already and can have an intelligent conversation about what the commodity is that an importer is trying to determine if it falls within the scope or not. So that's another resource to consider.
Great. Yep. Looks like we have another question here too. So is it better to pay the dumping at the time of entry to avoid the full dumping? Well, you have to pay it at the time of entry if you want to import it, and you won't know the full amount until the order is finalized. So this is the whole problem, unfortunately, with this situation is they require you when you import it to pay the preliminary amount if you want to import it. The only way you possibly could, well, bottom line is the duties will be due, and then, again, you can't avoid the final dumping amount because that will change. But yeah, there's not a good answer there other than it's just a requirement to pay it when you import it, and you will end up paying the full amount at some point in time when the final order is issued. All right. Okay, great. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. It sounds like we did a fairly good job here of explaining things. Hopefully that is the case. Of course, feel free to reach out to Flexport if you have questions or any follow-up, and we'd be happy to discuss that with you. Again, we want to thank everybody for joining the webinar today, and all is good. Have a great day.